Planet of Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right. Greetings to everyone watching today. Gordon will be joining me very, very shortly, but until then, I'm going to just hold the fort a little bit solo. He's just running a little bit late, but within 5 minutes, we'll be on. Welcome. We have a lot to go through today, though we won't have too much time to compress a lot of the details we will be hitting at. But obviously, I think what's on a lot of people's minds is the developments pertaining to Alaska. For one, I mean, obviously there's some major things happening in Washington, D.C. On the soft underbelly of Russia. We know that there are some different discussions around what exactly is going on regarding Armenia and Azerbaijan. Iran, leading officials within the Iranian government have recently given out some very startling messaging, indicating that the deliverance of the Zangezur corridor that cuts through just above Iran, through Azerbaijan, Armenia, into Turkey, and then into Europe, providing Caspian Sea oil and a lot more, will be seen possibly as an act of war, akin, in the words of the head of the Iranian National Guard or Revolutionary Guard, as what Russia saw with Ukraine and foreign manipulation in Ukraine, which resulted in the special military operation. Now, if this is just smokescreen, I don't really know. It is something I was just reading, and that bodes ill in one way. There are certain traps that have been laid to try to destabilize the Russia-China-Iran alliance. Hopefully, saner heads do prevail on that count, and hopefully agreements have been reached in back channels, as we've been noticing certain agreements possibly have been reached between the U.S. and Russia, between Trump and Putin specifically, which Uchakov, a an advisor, a very close advisor to Vladimir Putin, has announced an agreement, a settlement has been agreed upon, which is acceptable to the Russians. What that looks like, we don't know. We're going to find out probably some more details, but probably not even the full story on Friday in Alaska. I'm going to talk to Gordon about a lot of what he thinks about what's been planned, what sabotage operations might be in play to prevent Putin's arrival in Anchorage, along with Lavrov, who also announced that he will also be attending if things are not derailed. So we're going to look at some of those dangers. We're going to look at some of what could have been negotiated for a broader peace initiative. But before we do any of that, let's listen to a word from one of today's sponsors, which is Goldco. So without further ado, let's open up with a word from Goldco. All right, have you heard about President Trump's impact on gold? Every time Trump's name surges in the headlines, gold goes with it. It happened the day he took office, and it's still going up. Gold doesn't just like Trump, it rallies around him. If you bought gold the day he became president, you'd be up almost $400 an ounce by now. Here is the thing. Gold has been used as a store for value for centuries. The government can't easily manipulate it, and it's known as a hedge against market risk and inflation. How high will the price of gold go under Trump's second term? Will gold continue to break record after record in 2025 and beyond? Learn about an IRS loophole that allows you to diversify your savings with gold and silver tax and penalty free, with a free copy of gold and silver kit sent directly to your doorstep. Plus, you can qualify for up to 10% instant match and bonus silver. Visit badlandsgold.com to learn how you can add gold to your portfolio. That's badlandsgold.com. All right. Hey, and it's Gordon. I mean,
what's up? Sorry, I was arguing with Ash about Bitcoin on Balance Daily. So,
what was the just in the most summary recap?
Yeah, I won't rehash the argument.
Essentials. Yeah,
she was arguing about the comments that Michael Saylor made about MicroStrategy's being audited by the big four firms, and she was saying that it was proof that the plan for the future of Bitcoin is to rely on the big four auditing firms to like prove their reserves of Bitcoin. But that's not what I think. My argument was that that's not what Michael Saylor actually meant. What Michael Saylor was saying, he was being asked in the moment on stage, are you going to post your proof of reserves? Meaning, are you going to post the IP address or whatever of every single Bitcoin that MicroStrategies holds, which is like thousands of Bitcoin. And he said, no, we're not going to do that because it would require immense resources. We're just going to use these audits that the SEC requires us to do every year, and we're going to post the audit. And then they're going to do an audit of our reserves. They're going to say, here's how many reserves they actually have. I'm going to sign it under penalty of perjury. If I lie, then I go to prison. And Ash was saying, well, isn't that just a continuation of the existing corrupt system that we have? And the answer is yes, it is under that premise. But as Saylor has pointed out, the point of MicroStrategy is not to become the future of finance. The point of MicroStrategy is to create a vehicle to recruit money from institutional investors who are not under current regulations allowed to buy and hold Bitcoin. So like the big hedge funds are not allowed to go out and buy Bitcoin and hold it. However, they can go buy stock in a company that goes out and buys and holds Bitcoin. So he was basically saying, and he said in the same sentence, if you aren't comfortable with that, if you aren't comfortable with the auditing system, I would encourage you not to invest in MicroStrategies. Just go buy Bitcoin, because I'm going to use the banks and I'm going to use the investment institutions to drive up the price of Bitcoin for the benefit of everybody holding Bitcoin. And I think he didn't say it in this moment, but I think the idea is that if Bitcoin does what Saylor and others have said it's going to do, which is to destroy the Federal Reserve and destroy the fiat dollar, and wash away Wall Street effectively, that also would effectively wash away MicroStrategies, his company, which is within the stock market. So, that's, again, it's not worth like rehashing the argument, but
no, I hear you.
It's just a difference of opinion of like, what is the purpose of MicroStrategy? The purpose of MicroStrategy is a temporary vehicle to destroy Wall Street, because he's sucking away. They realize what they do is they give him money, they lend him money, and then he takes that money and he buys Bitcoin. And by taking those billions of dollars and buying Bitcoin, it drives up the price of Bitcoin. He then uses that price hike to go back to the same banks and say, I now have more liquidity that I can leverage against. Give me more money. And they say, okay. And they give him more money. He takes that loan. He then goes, buys more Bitcoin. It drives up the price of Bitcoin. And it's just a big cycle where he's sucking all the money out of Wall Street and into Bitcoin. He's gone around and he's pitching this now to all of the big like Fortune 500 companies as a great way for them to drive up their stock price. He says, put Bitcoin on your books and then leverage that to take out loans against your Bitcoin and then buy more Bitcoin to drive up the price. And all of them are like, holy shit, this is like infinite money. And he's like, yeah, it is infinite money. But it's also the way that you destroy the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve will ultimately be overtaken by Bitcoin once it reaches a certain apex of its price. So
are you of the view that Bitcoin is a finite thing, that there cannot? I mean, I know that there technically can't be more than whatever 25 million or something Bitcoin in circulation or in existence at any given time, but they can be infinitely divisible as well, and every single infinitely like divisible particle of the Bitcoin can also increase or decrease in value. Are you? So I've had discussions with people like whether that means that it's infinite as well in potential for how much it can be subdivided, and thus basically, or is it absolutely still finite in your mind?
Well, so it's a great question. 21 million, and I'm not the Bitcoin expert.
Or 21 million, that's it.
Yeah.
So clearly, I'm not either. Clearly, I'm also not in any way.
21 million Bitcoin. However, you said it like in circulation, not in circulation yet. I think it's going to be 100 years before all the Bitcoin is unlocked. And because you have, like, you probably heard of Bitcoin mining, they're like supercomputers that are basically solving math problems. And then as a reward for solving these math problems, they are incrementally given a small amount of Bitcoin. And that amount, as time goes on, like every 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, that money cuts in half. So it was like years ago, you were getting 10, 12 Bitcoin after you solve a certain number of math equations. Then it went to 6. Then I think now it's at like 3. You get like, or maybe it's at like 1.5 now. I forget what it is. But again, 1.5 Bitcoin 2 years ago was like $30,000. Now 1.5 Bitcoin is $270,000. And soon as the price goes up, it'll be $1 million. And as the price goes up, more people are going to be turning on these supercomputers to mine Bitcoin because it's going to be worth their time and investment. And so basically, as that Bitcoin is unlocked, it's then released into the market. So I think there's still, I don't know what the exact number is, but there's still a percentage. It's relatively small at this point, but there's still a few percentage of Bitcoin, about 21 million, that hasn't been unlocked yet. And it's going to be like 100 years before it's actually unlocked because of all the computing power involved. But anyway,
Approximately how much is in circulation now? I know we're just going out like this weird side
yeah, I
tangent,
mean,
but
my
we'll
guess is
get to it.
yeah, my guess is it's probably like around 20 million. There's
That's
also
that's what's
there's
in
also
circulation now. Okay.
something like that. I mean, I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But
Okay.
my understanding is there's also this phenomenon because it's been around for like 15 years now or whatever, 18 years. There's a phenomenon happening now where people die and they have their Bitcoin on cold storage, like stored offline, and
And
they
no one
didn't
can
give
get it.
their password to anybody, and the Bitcoin's gone now, which
Oh yeah.
it causes deflation for Bitcoin,
Right.
because now you've taken Bitcoin out of circulation forever. And
Right.
Michael Saylor, by the way, said that's his plan as well. His plan is basically he doesn't have any kids. His plan is basically to put his Bitcoin in cold storage and just die, and that's going to be like his gift to all the Bitcoiners is that when he dies and his Bitcoin is forever lost, it'll spike the price of Bitcoin. So because he's going to have a shitload of Bitcoin by that time. So it's like, again, like there's a lot of interesting elements here, but you're right. It's infinitely divisible. But think about this. If I have one Bitcoin right now, a year ago, that Bitcoin would have been worth whatever, $60,000, right? That same one Bitcoin, if I haven't bought any more or sold any in that past year, that Bitcoin today is worth $121,000, right? Now, each one of those Bitcoin is divisible by a million, and one millionth of a Bitcoin is called a Satoshi. So I can go out and buy $10 worth of
Oh, so
Bitcoin.
there's a bottom limit. You can't get smaller than a Satoshi. Is that what you're
In
saying? Or
maybe
can
in
I
the
get like
future
a
you can.
sub Satoshi, like a
As of right now, my understanding is as of right now, it's just Satoshis and Bitcoin. So it's like
okay.
cents and dollars, right? Like 1
Yeah.
million Satoshi is a Bitcoin. Now, in the distant future, when one Bitcoin is potentially worth $100 billion, maybe one Satoshi is worth $1 million or whatever, then yeah, maybe it makes sense to subdivide it further. But at that
And have like
point,
a billion sub Satoshis or
yeah.
yeah,
But
meaning
at that
micro
point,
Toshis.
yeah, but at that point,
Okay.
if you have a billion, I mean, if you have a Bitcoin that's worth $1 billion
Mm,
and they subdivide it, you don't lose any money. It's not like your money
no.
becomes inflated. It's just that you have more of whatever this new denomination is. And so as of right now, people are still talking about this. This is the way G Money explains it, and I think in Burning Bright, I think it's a great way of explaining it. As of right now, Bitcoin is still measured in Bitcoin. Like you go out and you buy zero point 0.01 Bitcoin for however many dollars it costs. They're still calling it Bitcoin, right? Once they start only talking about it in terms of Satoshis, because Bitcoin becomes such a large metric, that's when it really becomes interesting because people are no longer talking about trading Bitcoin. They're talking about trading Satoshis. And at that point, it's really taken off. But I think at this point, we really are still dealing in Bitcoin because, you can go out and buy 0.1 Bitcoin for whatever, $12,000, which, is a large amount of money. But in terms of like an investment, like people who are, financial markets, $12,000 isn't that much money.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. It's one of those things where,
Yeah.
many years ago, I thought it was a scam like everyone else. And the more I've become educated on it, and gone out and learned about it, I understand it a lot more now. And once you understand something, you stop fearing it. And the most appealing part of it is the fact that it's finite, that it cannot be, um, uh, create, like there can be no new creation. And where Ash and I ended it was, pegging the like there's been talk about pegging the dollar to gold again, like returning to that system. Well, what about the fact that I've been tracking geopolitics now for 2 years, longer than that, but for this job, um, they're finding gold mines all over the place now. They're finding gold mines in Saudi Arabia. They're finding gold mines
Well,
in
you can also
Africa.
make it, right? If we develop the fusion economy where we all of a sudden start harnessing the power of fusion, you could
Yeah,
start literally transmuting various elements on the periodic table in order to generate gold in
alchemy.
abundance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like a real scientific alchemy, like grounded in and that could like we're on the cusp of that. So
Or
that would
mining
completely like
asteroids, or mining
as
asteroids. Like,
as
yeah,
well. That'll inevitably happen, and that'll obviously affect price in a massive way. And so, yeah, it's a good reminder of like the relativity of value when it comes to like material things in the material world. That everything, uranium didn't really have a value before the atomic age. The value of uranium was that it was a useful. It came from pitch blende, this mixture of a variety of elements that would be found in certain like deposits, and they found that this thing that they later called uranium was useful for dyeing glass for like when you want like a yellow tinge in a glass in a church. So it had a certain amount of value, but really nothing comparable to the value that it took after we started developing civilian nuclear reactors, when we started developing an understanding of the geometry of the atom, and then that power all of a sudden completely changed our relationship to the entirety of the periodic table. And it also gave us a power that came with it of creating new elements, or at least bringing them in, that might have taken millions or billions of years for them to naturally occur on their own, like plutonium or the transuranics, which only emerged, after the atomic age because we could start working in that domain of plasmas. So, like everything in the material world that humans create is always going to be relative to our knowledge of what we have or have not discovered about God's creation. And if we're ignorant about elements of God's creation, which we will always be,
Mhm.
all guaranteed, like all of the things associated with electricity, the type of wires, the copper wires that would be associated with or useful for transmitting early electric currents from point A to point B, that won't have a lot of value, as much value than it would after Ben Franklin makes his big eureka and transmits that into the general society. And then all of a sudden, all the wires, the tech, everything that would help you massively increases. So I'm thinking Bitcoin, like my view on it, because I obviously I'm a newbie and I got my little Bitcoin wallet. I take payments for some of my articles that way. But
Nice.
overall, my view is that, like, philosophically speaking, if we remain ignorant to what causes value and instead choose to hold on to this insane idea that value is caused by gambling on stock markets,
Yeah.
or like some supply demand logic that is rooted in British speculative monetarism, it doesn't really matter. It'll still destroy us. And if we wake up and start associating value with something tied to benefiting human life, then Bitcoin can play a really positive role the way I see it currently. But it really
Yeah.
is contingent upon human knowledge and the type of stupidity we adhere to or we let go of that will determine whether this can be good or bad. In my mind.
Yeah, yeah, and what's interesting is, like G Money, who
Mm,
you've met before, but you'll see him
yeah,
again in
sure.
Deadwood. He was once a gold bug, as he calls it. Like he once thought that Bitcoin was a scam, and he was all in on gold and silver, and had all his gold and silver. Uh, and he's changed his mind at this point. And it's interesting because creating a dollar that's pegged to gold to the point that we just made, what happens when they find more gold? Like and then gold, like the price of gold goes down. Does that then bring down the price of like the value of all currencies that are pegged to that system? And then of course you get into like the alchemy, like you were saying, and mining asteroids and all that. Versus, as G Money argues, and I don't know if he's right or not, but pegging the dollar to Bitcoin or something like that is finite, where you can't create more. I
Mm,
don't know. There's a lot to be said about it. I don't know enough about financial systems, and I'm not read in enough on economics and all that to forward like a coherent, strong argument. I like taking in the information, and I like watching others debate about it because people who know what they're talking about, because I find it compelling. I'm just not the person to lead the discussion. I can have very simple arguments like the ones that like the one that Ash and I were just having. And I think they're great to have because it educates people on what is the real problem here. The real problem, to Ash's point, was the entire stock market is based on these four firms that every year or every quarter or whatever it is, they go and they audit the stock market. They go and they audit the companies that have their
So
companies listed
is
on the
this like
stock market.
Moody's, Standard and Poor's, these
It's
things, or is it,
no. It's
no?
the big four is what they're called here. I'll pull it up. The
Okay.
big
I
four
mean, it
is
doesn't. Yeah.
here. The big four accounting firms right here.
Okay.
These are names that you'll recognize. It's Deloitte, Ernst and Young, KPMG, and
APM.
PricewaterhouseCooper. Right.
Right. Right. Okay. That's
Um,
what. Okay.
Yeah, so like
Yeah.
those are the four,
Um.
and like those letters represent that. I think it used to be the big eight, and then they collapse into, like, they merge into the big four. Yeah, so here's the big eight. Earlier in the 20th century, it was the big eight. Arthur Andersen,
Mhm.
Arthur Young, Coopers and LeBrand, Deloitte Haskins, Ernst and Winnie, Pete Marwick, Mitchell, Price Waterhouse, and Touche Ross. And so those 8 then merged with one another. And so again, it's like on a long enough timeline, they probably all just merge into one company, right? And then you just have
Oh, yeah.
one company auditing the entire stock market. And to Ash's point, it's like we've already had multiple moments where these companies have been caught colluding with businesses on the Fortune 500 list to lie about what they found during their audit, and then the company CEOs go and sign the audit, and then relatively limited consequence to the companies, or maybe the guy who signed the audit goes to jail, but the company isn't held accountable.
No, it's so rigged. It's so
Yeah,
rigged. It's a joke. And
yeah,
that's what I was thinking about, like, because they seem to work in tandem with Moody's and Standard and Poor's, which offer the ratings onto different companies too, and different types of, like, the subprime mortgages. The reason why that even became a bomb that was able to be detonated was that you had Moody's and Standard and Poor's just giving AAA ratings to all of these junk bonds and companies practicing in junk bond sales that had clearly sitting on nothing, a big nothing burger that could only blow up. But because simply of the rating, it's like in the comic book realm. I used to invest in comic books when I was a kid in the 90s. And it was such a scam because prices of a lot of these things are fluctuating. There's crappy comics that, people all of a sudden there's a certain amount of hype. Some of the key
it's like shit
big
coins. It's
magazines.
like shit
It's like
coins.
shit coins. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Somebody like
yeah.
hypes it up, they coordinate it. Wizard magazine, which is like a big, or back in the day, they were like a big trendsetter. So whatever their editorial staff said was going to be cool, it kind of became cool by virtue of them just saying it. And then, the crappiest thing could become for a few months the most valuable commodity. Everybody wants it for some reason. They don't even like the art, they don't like the stories, but it's just the hype.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it
What's the
collapses.
value? It's like, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
financial incentive. And that's at the heart of it all. At the heart of it all is like these institutions are going to act. Look,
Yeah.
the creature from Jekyll Island, what was it? 6 guys who went to Jekyll Island to create the Federal Reserve in 1910.
Oh, or something. Yeah, some a short number, yeah.
Yeah. So the people who are descendant from like whether they are bloodline descendant or they're the spiritual descendant or whatever, corporate partners or whatever of those 6 guys are going to have a interest in preserving the system as it currently stands, preserving the Federal Reserve, preserving the fiat currency market that they can easily manipulate by pressing a button and printing more money, etc. However, like to the point that I just explained with Michael Saylor is going around educating all of these other institutions who may or may not have those same connections to those banks. They probably do to some extent, but they also are interested because they're greedy bastards in making money right now. And if they can find a loophole in the system, they're going to exploit it, just like with the big 4 accounting firms. If they can find a loophole to make money and get an edge up over their competition, they're going to exploit that. Well, here's a loophole that Michael Saylor found, which is you take out a loan from a bank, you go buy Bitcoin, you then put that on your books. The price goes up because you bought $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. You then take the increase, leverage it for more money, take out a bigger loan, and then buy more Bitcoin. And it's an infinite money loop. All right. And somebody in the chat said, isn't that that sounds like a Ponzi scheme? Yes. And Saylor's pretty open about that. He's like, it is a Ponzi scheme, but it's a Ponzi scheme that has a benefit to the populist movement of Bitcoin. Because I can go out right now and buy $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, $10 worth of Bitcoin, $1 worth of Bitcoin. And while Saylor's doing that with his company and other other Fortune 500 companies are now doing it as well, they are using institutional investor money to drive up the price of Bitcoin because they're greedy bastards who want to benefit from that. But my Bitcoin that's sitting in my cold storage wallet is also going up in value. So it's like the rising tide lifts all boats. Ultimately, at some point, people are going to shift away from this is where like Ash and I were kind of like bickering about this. They're going to shift away from the US dollar into something that is more beneficial, more of an advantage. Because even though they're like their banks, like the Federal Reserve, who want to cling to that old system. At a certain point, there's going to be the incentive structure is going to invert, and everyone else outside of that small group of people that by the way are inside a very small group of financial, like the financial world, they're all going to move away from that. And here's an example of, like, I think this is a good place to start. Here's an article from RT. I was mentioning this to Ash. This is from July 28th. It says, forget Wall Street. Bitcoin's real test is happening right here. Young Kenyans in urban centers are rapidly embracing Bitcoin as a form of payment. Look at these pictures. This is a marketplace in Kenya, okay? These people are buying and selling goods using individual to individual transactions with their phones, where they can walk up and buy French fries from this guy and he can pay for it using a couple Satoshis, saying, all right, here's however many Satoshis for these French fries. Thank you. No banks involved, no institutions involved. They don't need a credit card processing company. They don't need any of that stuff. All they need is the ability to transfer Bitcoin from one person to the other, the technology to use it, which is readily available, even in a country as impoverished as Kenya. And so Ash was saying, well, at what point do you get the institutions to buy into this stuff where they are operating in Bitcoin and not the USD? If they are doing this in Kenya, in street markets in Kenya, how soon do you think like you're going to be able to walk into a store in America and do the exact same thing? Probably a lot sooner than you think. And once that happens, that's going to be where the floodgates open up. I mean, Russia's already looking into doing that, by the way. Russia already announced last year they're going to look into a way, because they got kicked off of the what is it, the SWIFT system, right? Isn't that what it's called? Yeah, they got kicked off of the SWIFT system, which is the system that banks use in the West to transfer funds because of the Ukrainian war. So now Russia has to look for alternative ways to transfer money. And so they're trying to develop other avenues, and their mechanism they're looking at is Bitcoin. And so at a certain point, these bankers are all going to be sitting there with their US dollars that are going down in value, while other currencies, not just Bitcoin, but other currencies are going up in value. And are they going to be the bag holders? Like, they can cling to the US dollar if they want, but the US dollar is going down the tubes, unless, of course, Donald Trump maybe pegs it to Bitcoin or pegs it to gold or whatever. So again, I think people discount too much incentive structures. And like right now, the incentive structure in the financial world is basically to play the casino, to utilize these corrupt systems to make as much money for yourself, for your business, and not get caught doing it. And by the way, there's a lot of gray area there. There's a lot of gray area where you can do this stuff that might be morally, ethically questionable, but it's totally legal, and all of them are doing it. And so the point is that at a certain point, the incentive structure is going to move away from the existing system and towards something different. It might be Bitcoin. It might be something totally different from Bitcoin. But right now, I would say Bitcoin is probably the leader in the clubhouse in terms of like the actual ability to engage in a transaction. I mean, gold, of course, is gold, but there's right now, there's not like a way for me to buy something using my gold, like walk up to the French fry cart in Kenya and say, hey, how much gold for a French fry? Oh, well, I need gold is trading at what? Like $3,000 an ounce. So I need you have to chisel off like a little shaving of your gold and give it to me. I mean, that's just not practical. It's not practical at all. Sure. So you're going to have to come up with another denomination that represents gold, whether that's dollars or cents or coins or silver or whatever it is. You've now created the same system, the same problem that we have right now with the Federal Reserve. It's just on a much more tangible, safe in the immediate future than obviously just being totally fiat and totally, like money creation out of thin air. But on a long enough time scale, that gold is going to present another problem, because they're discovering more and more mines everywhere. We're going to start mining the asteroids. We're going to start doing the alchemy, all that stuff. And your gold bars are going to be worth a lot less when as more gold floods into the market, just like your dollars are worth a lot less when they turn on the money printers and print more money. So again, may not become a problem in our lifetime, but it's just something that we have to be aware of as we are exploring alternatives to the existing system. And we have to keep an open mind as to what the solution is. And do we want a solution that lasts for 20 years, or do we want a solution that lasts forever?
Yeah, no, it's well said. And those are the important considerations for sure that we should all be thinking about because, the system we've been living in that we were born into is not long for this world. There will be a new system. It's just a question of, I guess, like what will be its operating procedure, like what will be the philosophy of value, who will it serve, the people or the sociopaths that broke the current system we were born into, that created that go nowhere time bomb system. So those are the battle lines. And of course, I think, like, me, I've cited this a few times, but I've been like a student of the thinking personally of the American system school of Henry C. Carey and Lincoln and Clay. So that's sort of what I've spent a lot of my time reading and researching, is how they were thinking in saner times before the U.S. became a basket case over the dead bodies of so many great leaders. And one of the invariants, whether it's reading the writings of Hamilton's report on the subject of manufacturers, or reading Henry Clay's addresses to the Congress, or reading Henry C. Carey, whose books I have behind me, is that they're all of this understanding that that we always have to focus on um, the physical reality underlying human health and happiness. And so there's certain physical parameters that are non-negotiable, that always have to both be defended, well, one, be created, defended, and then improved upon, no matter what. Just because we live in the physical world and we have certain biological needs like food and water and shelter, and these are just the physical parameters and the types of productive systems that we create in agriculture, in the manufacturing base, can either enhance or destroy those aptitudes. Like today, you got the green agenda, the eco freaks who've been bringing online, following the Alexander King Club of Rome logic for like decades now, the idea that agriculture should only be permitted if we can burn it. And so they've created a whole weird system of contorted logic, where we produce corn all over the place. So much corn, and it's great. That could feed a lot of people. There's a lot of, like, 15,000 kids die unnecessarily every day of totally solvable problems. The biggest one being starvation and lack of water, like malnutrition. We could deal with that, except they've somehow created a situation whereby like 40%, last time I read this, of America's corn production goes to bioethanol, to burn it in cars. And it's like, what are we doing? Like, so they've got, or just removing agriculture from the productive sector, like paying farmers money just to not farm and instead host windmills on their farmland. I live in farmland, and I can go out of my house and look at farms behind me, and there's windmills across the horizon, the landscape, and you get this in all parts of the world, right? So we've actually created value incentives, like, to destroy our productive output. So if you're doing things that involve both improving the access to those things that everybody needs, and then with that, the other questions of, like, you don't want it to just be utilitarian, right? You want to have a society that has pleasure, happiness, and creativity, spontaneity. You want all that stuff as well. Otherwise, you could slip and fall into a communist sort of, like, utilitarian weight, like, dystopia. That could happen too. So you want to be sure that our society has an understanding that the mind and the soul also need their foods. It's not just the body, right? So from that, you got to give people inspiration. You got to give them a chance to be inventive, to have a sense that their inventions and new ideas in even the arts and entertainment, new innovative concepts, will also have monetary benefits that will also help them live better. So, and again, you don't want that to corrupt people in the other direction either, right? So that's always the balance between, like, utilitarianism and hyper ego pleasure of the individualistic, atomized person, disassociated from the greater whole community that they were born into. That's always the thing, right? If pleasure by itself can easily become a point that drives people insane if they think that that's you know all that value is. Like Milton Friedman extremists, right? Who are just like, heroin should just be as abundant and available, as farm goods and whatever, because if anything, more abundant and more available, because in the mind of, like, a Milton Friedman extremist, you'll make more money by selling heroin, and money makes the world go round in these idiots' logic. They don't see a qualitative difference between somebody working in a useless, destructive type of employment like selling drugs or manufacturing it versus somebody who's actually working in a productive sector. There's no difference. So it's like if you're always doing things and tempering your decisions, evaluating your decisions, on a regular basis to see if, okay, are we doing things that are making people healthier, happier, better, more at peace, more secure with their life because we're creating a harmonious set of relationships with different groups within a country and outside of those countries by finding, visionary things that will unite us in a common community. Like, again, Trump is coming to, or Putin's coming to the United States, apparently, if it's not sabotaged, to Anchorage on Friday, which is coming up soon.
Yep.
Could be sabotage. We should talk about that at some point. But what are they going to
Well,
discuss? One of the things that they could discuss, and I think probably has been discussed by relevant channels, behind the scenes, is the question of mutual Arctic development. Things like the Bering Strait rail tunnel, that's close to my heart, has been a project that's been, on the books now for 150 plus years. Abraham Lincoln gave a speech to Congress in 1864 calling for the building of the Bering Strait rail corridor with telegraph lines and roads
yeah, we
between
definitely
Russia
we
and
definitely should talk about that. Yeah.
yeah, like these are ideas. And so if you have Bitcoin or whatever is in circulation, whatever the money that we agree upon, the thing we call money, whatever that is, in circulation in a world that is building things like that, that's reducing the chance of World War III, that's bringing about a better brotherhood of and more jobs that are of high quality, great. And if you're living in a world that's going nowhere, that has no vision for the future, where we're living in infrastructure that's perished over like 60 years of neglect, like we are, then doesn't really matter in my mind what type of thing is in circulation. It'll still reflect the fitness of the physical reality that we're living in. So that's my parameter. Whatever the details are, I like, don't matter
Yeah.
as much to me as
Yeah.
that main thing.
Yeah. And so the the point here, like I think the
Yeah.
discussion here is not to be about necessarily about Bitcoin. I think it's the idea is to open people's minds to the possibilities and discern what makes sense and like logic, reason, and all that. Because I think the problem is that even outside of like those of us who have broken outside of the system of systems and like the controlled thinking dynamics, still also fall back into outer limits of like new control systems and new paradigms. For example, like on the screen here, I'm not Sissy, I'm not picking on you. I just want to address this. Sissa 23 says, doesn't the Constitution say gold and silver will be our money? Yes, it does. The Constitution also says that only white men who own land can vote. So if we're going to go back to the Constitution and restore it, every single word of it, then women, you will not be voting. And those who rent your home, you will also not be voting. That's just the rule. That's the rule as dictated in the Constitution. So again, like if we're going to become beholden to ideas that are not necessarily rooted in, I mean, the Constitution was a compromise. Even Benjamin Franklin walked out and said, it was the best we could do. It's a republic if you can keep it. There were a lot of compromises they had to make. They had to compromise on slavery, which Thomas Jefferson was upset about. They were upset about the fact that they couldn't free all the slaves, but South Carolina, people who were aligned with London said, we will not, the day before or 2 days before, we will not sign. I think his name was Stephen, the representative from South Carolina. He came out and said, we will not sign unless you pull out the clause about slavery. Because originally James Madison had written,
Medicine. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I said Thomas Jefferson, just a slip of the tongue.
Right.
But yeah, James Madison had written originally that they were going to abolish slavery because it said all men are created equal. That's what we wrote in the Declaration of Independence. And they changed it to say, all right, white men who own land are those are the ones who are going to vote. And the logic is that these are people who have personal investment in the country because they own the soil. They're not going to pack up and leave tomorrow because they're tied to the land now. That was the logic. It wasn't necessarily based on anything more nefarious than that. I mean, the Virginia Slave Code certainly built into the racial aspect of it, but that again was London influence from the 1600s. So again, like we have to keep an open mind to this stuff, that if we become beholden to every single word in the Constitution, our society is going to change in ways that maybe people aren't prepared for and may not be the best possible outcome. It won't be the most inclusive that you think of. The other another comment, because again, I just want to
Well, just quick, and just to add to
yeah,
that quickly, the Constitution clearly doesn't say we formed a perfect union. It's literally says in order to form a more perfect union. So
yes,
philosophically, there's a self-awareness in the authors of that type of language, that there's a process of perfectibility underway that we're participating in, though it's not a crystallized thing. It could always be made better. Could also be made worse if you're stupid, which,
yeah,
you know, that could also happen. But the point is,
the
you
human
you
element.
have
Yeah,
to create a freedom for future discoveries, future, innovations, so that you don't get like an Amish. You don't make the mistake of the Amish, where all of a sudden you're like, okay, here at this arbitrary moment of 18 whatever 25 technology, we're gonna stop. We're gonna
yeah.
stop our progress, and we're good now in this finished state where we'll allow for buckles but not zippers. We'll
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
and you also make the argument that the Constitution led us to where we are right now. Now, it took hundreds of years, and there's a lot to be said about that. And that's pretty that says a lot about the benefits of the Constitution, is that it took this long for us to fall this far into this pit of tyranny. But the Constitution did allow us to get to where we are right now. So therefore, basic logic, it was not perfect because it allowed us to get here. It took a long time, an incremental subversion against the Constitution to get us here, but it did lead us to where we are right now. And so we have to recognize that therefore it was not perfect and it could have been better, but they had to compromise to get it done in the time. And they were captives of the fact that they were human and they were dealing with other humans, and humans have to negotiate. And that's the way it is. If all men were angels, then government would not be necessary. Thomas Jefferson. The other comment that I want to, again, not picking on people, but I just want to make sure that we're having logical, like we want to engage in logic and reason as opposed to being attached to ideas or attached to specific material entities such as Bitcoin, such as gold. Here's Master C. Barber. So this may sound stupid, but if someone holds a gun to my head and threatens my life, they could have essentially forced me to give them all my Bitcoin by transfer with my phone. Where's the security? Absolutely right. I would also posit that I can have my bank account on my phone, right? I can go open a bank account, then get my app, and somebody could walk up to me with a gun and say, transfer all your US fiat dollars out of your bank account, wire it to this number right now. They can walk into your house where your gold is kept in your safe, hold a gun to your head and say, give me all the gold in your safe. It's the exact same thing. I mean, you're just talking about a different system. So again, like the security issue is not a flaw with the technology of Bitcoin. It's just human nature. Are you willing to stand up for yourself and defend yourself against somebody who wants to kill you and take your possessions? And again, that's a moment by moment, case by case situation. The answer for most people is yes, if I can. But if they take your family hostage and are threatening to kill your kids, you're probably going to give them your Bitcoin. You're probably going to give them your gold. You're probably going to give them all your assets to save your family. Most people would. But again, that's not a Bitcoin technology question or flaw. That is a flaw of humanity.
Yeah, there's two choices right now at this juncture in our conversation, which is where to go, because part of me wants to keep on like pulling on this thread of the philosophy of Bitcoin pros and cons and all of that stuff, and then the other part of me wants to deal with the question of the Arctic, what Trump and Putin are talking about, and all of these other geopolitical things.
Let's go
So I
to
feel
Russia and Putin because it's more
okay,
like we can
all
have
right,
the Bitcoin conversation anytime. And honestly, we
okay,
should like you and like I would love to moderate a conversation between you and either Chris Paul or G Money or maybe both. Because I mean G Money's a maxi, so he can come off pretty heavy handed, but
yeah, I don't get along with those types of personalities.
yeah, but
Yeah,
Chris Paul understands the
yeah,
maxi mindset as does Burning
sure,
Bright, and
okay,
they would I think have that. They would
yeah,
be
I
better at
get.
the conversation than I
I would say,
probably would.
uh,
So
okay, yeah, fair enough.
yeah.
Well, okay, cool. So look, on that point, as I briefly alluded to, and then I noticed that you would put out a little bit of a warning because there is some messaging happening right now. Ghost, you currently don't know my family.
Good one.
It seems like um So there is some messaging that's been been put out. I know the Russian Foreign Ministry has also put out a warning that there's an increased threat towards some form of a false flag being carried out on the front lines in Ukraine somewhere. I believe that they presumed that the most likely place that the Five Eyes or whatever agencies might engage with Kiev in carrying out some false flag to disrupt potential meeting between Trump and Putin would be in Kharkov. That's
Yes.
one place. Now, I don't know. Well, what do you think? Do you think that this is likely going to be sabotaged, or do you think it's going to happen first of all?
Well, I mean, I think the idea that that there's going to be attempts to sabotage it are very. I think that makes all the
Yeah,
sense in the world. I mean, I think that their relationship has been sabotaged since before Trump was even elected president in 2016.
yeah,
I mean, that whole narrative, by the way, is being. We were just talking about that on Badlands Daily. All the stuff that's coming out now that's affirming that it wasn't just James Comey and Hillary Clinton and a few others. It was the entire FBI.
yeah,
It's very hard to look at anybody and say, well, the rank and file of the FBI are the good people. Maybe, but they had no power to stop any of this. And it was
yeah.
understood, it was known throughout the FBI, or at least the people who had access to the information, that this was happening, that Donald Trump was totally innocent. He was being framed up as a Putin lackey when like the opposite was actually the case. And nobody stood up and said they're
No
lying.
one.
Nobody in the
That's
rank and file of the FBI that we know of came out and said, now
nobody.
maybe they're people who are like leaking information and we'll learn their names in due time. Okay, fine. But right now we don't have those names. We don't know that information. So to me, that's an indictment of the entire institution. And if there are redeemable people in the institution, and I'm sure there probably are at least a few, that doesn't mean the institution is redeemable. That means the institution needs to go away. You can preserve the few good eggs that might still be in there and then maybe start something new if that's what's warranted. But again, like this shouldn't be an exercise in going after individuals. It should be an exercise in going after institutions with
That's the
individuals
key.
going to prison.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that people need to really just hold that in mind. At this point, they've seen enough examples of peace processes getting sabotaged by false flags, whether it was like I think you brought this up in your write-up, but the case of Bucha on April 1st, 2022, that was clearly a false flag. Russia had nothing to do with that, but yet we were all told that all of these people were massacred in this town of Bucha in eastern Ukraine. And all BBC, all of the three-letter agency front group, corporate media outlets were all pummeling the exact same narrative with the same visuals day in, day out to 'cause what was happening? It was the Russia-Ukraine peace process that was happening. I think it was in Istanbul at the time that was actually making progress towards a quick end to the special military operation by simply providing Russia what it desired, which are peace guarantees, no entry into NATO, that's it, and just respect the will of the people of Crimea. That was it. To basically, be part of Russia because they had a vote. So they were actually going to do that until the lead negotiator was murdered, and this whole thing was blown up. And you had the same thing with Trump meeting up with Xi Jinping in 2017 in Florida. Xi Jinping came to Florida. They were having some amazing discussions pertaining to U.S.-China relationships and cooperation. And during the meeting, it was announced that Bashar al-Assad had done another gas attack,
yep.
destroying so many of his people. Turns out in hindsight, complete fraud. All of the evidence now points as every single Syrian gas attack to the US proxies, the CIA proxies of al-Nusra, now called ISIS and now the government of Syria. That were the ones that were actually carrying out the thing. But that completely sabotaged the meeting. It ended halfway before it could get done. Trump then had to start taking a hard line on Xi for supporting Assad and Putin as well. So it's always the same thing. So of course we should expect to see something similar happening again. And what you have there from RT is what Kiev planning false flag attack ahead of Trump for the summit. Mm,
Yeah. So this is again, some of the audience is going to be familiar because we just talked about this on daily, but we'll rehash it that the Ministry of Defense, the Defense Ministry of Russia, has put out this narrative saying that Ukraine, the Ukrainian military, is planning on blowing up either a residential neighborhood, like a densely populated residential neighborhood, or a hospital in the town of Chugay, I think is how you pronounce it. Ash figured that out, which is just east of Kharkiv. And to that extent, they've already brought in a group of foreign. This is what they're saying. To this end, on Monday, August 11th, a group of foreign media journalists were transported by the SBU to the city of Chugayev in the Kharkov region under the cover story of preparing a series of reports about residents of the city and the frontline zone. So they're traveling there, saying we're going there to report about the front lines and see how are people living their day-to-day life. And the idea is that when they arrive there, which they already are there, all of a sudden there's going to be a hospital that blows up, or maybe like a residential building or something. A bunch of people are going to die, and then they're going to blame it on the Russian military and say the Russian military did this. Why would the Russian military do this? Now, because this story has been put out by the Kremlin and disseminated through the international media, maybe that subverts it from ever happening. Maybe they pick up the phone and say, all right, cancel that. We're not doing this false flag anymore. Maybe they move forward with it anyway because they're that desperate. But in any event, if anything happens at this point, whether it's in Chugayev or if it's in Kiev or if it's in the Donetsk or whatever, I think that point is going to be, well, this is obviously being done to subvert the summit. Like everyone understands that the CIA, or everyone should understand, the CIA wants to subvert the summit. They don't want Trump and Putin becoming friends. That is the ultimate. That is the ultimate bad condition. The thing that they cannot allow to happen is for Trump and Putin to become ostensible friends. Maybe they understand to some extent that they already are friends. Maybe they understand to some extent that they already are working together and have been for a long time. That's certainly the position that I adopt. But they can't afford for them to come out in public and for Trump to say Russia is our greatest ally and can become our greatest ally if we allow it to, and for Putin to say the same thing. Putin, in a lot of ways, has already kind of communicated that the American people are a very strong historic ally for Russia, and we should restore that formal condition. But yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like multiple things could happen from the summit. One possibility is that because I think Trump and Putin are working together, we've seen the rhetoric and narrative used to advance the idea of like an escalation in hostility, where Trump is moving, nuclear submarines into position around Russia, and then Medvedev comes out and says, "All right, well, maybe we'll nuke some cities ourselves." He's been saying that for a while, by the way. And heightened tension, the appearance of maybe a nuclear war on the horizon. That's a possibility. I also see the possibility that maybe this becomes a trend towards like Trump and Putin are friends. Russia isn't that bad. Like maybe we're moving down that path. The timing of this is very interesting. It's August 15th. They're going to have the meeting. September 3rd, you have the UN General Assembly meeting in New York. So you're going to have, I would expect maybe Putin comes to that, maybe he doesn't. Maybe it's just representatives. But you could have the opportunity then for Russian delegates to get together with American delegates and hash out some more issues, bilateral meetings. You then also have the 80th anniversary victory parade for World War II in Beijing happening. I think it's September 10th or maybe September 8th. It's a week after the.
I think it's the. I thought it was the 8th, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
It might be the 8th.
Putin is going to be there in Beijing with Xi.
Yeah. It's that Saturday, like whatever that's the 8th.
And didn't Trump even allude to the fact that he might even go to China for that, or was that? He did make some allusion to that, right?
Yeah, well, and that's the interesting part. What he said was, because he was asked about it, because Russia was asked, "Are you going to meet with Trump when you're there?" And because Trump's invited, I mean, America's invited. We were part of the winning team of World War II, right? And Russia said, "Yeah, well, I mean, if we're there and Trump's there," I think Dmitry Peskov said, "Yeah, I mean, if we're there and they're there, I mean, it makes all the sense. And they want to meet, like, yeah, we're all for meeting. Like, why wouldn't we want to meet with President Trump and hash out our differences? What a great opportunity." Trump was asked the same question. This is weeks ago. And he said, "Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to go to that because China's not on my good side right now. I love Xi. He's a great friend of mine." He always starts off every China rant with, "Xi and I are great friends. I love Xi. He's the best, one of my best friends ever. But China is in the doghouse because of XYZ, because of the economic situation, because of the tariff negotiation." Interestingly enough, I don't have this handy ready to go, but on Monday, me see, like extends China tariff on Monday, like within hours. It was within hours of the China tariff expiring, and so the tariff on China was at 30%. It currently is at 30%, and
Yep.
when it expired on Monday, it was going to go to 145%, which would have obviously created some issues. Hours before that expiration, Trump posted on True Social and said,
90-day postponement or
I'm going to
something.
extend this 90 days, which takes us
Yeah,
into November. So
right.
that kind of, I think, alleviates a lot of the tension between him and Xi. It certainly opens the door for him to go to Beijing at this point, and for him and Xi to basically have a nice um, interaction, at least ostensibly, without all the tension of the tariff stuff. Because they have 2 months to resolve that after the
Yep.
parade. The only issue then would be the tension between Trump and Putin. Well, they're meeting in 2 days, so they have the opportunity to come out from that meeting and say, all right, like we haven't figured everything out yet, but we are on much better terms now than we were yesterday. Yeah, like why can't we meet again when we're in Beijing? Like, yeah, I'll go ahead and come to the parade. I personally think that given Trump's relationship with Xi and the respect that he's shown Xi and the respect that Xi has shown Trump, it would be an insult and disrespectful for Trump not to go to Beijing and attend the parade. I think it would make a lot of sense for him to go as like an act of good faith and like diplomacy toward the effort of like a negotiated tariff situation with China. I think dragging out the tariff situation with China is disrupting the transnational corporations who can't plan long term for their operations. Like, do we keep our manufacturing in China? Do we move it out of China? Can we move back in? Because are we getting 145% tariff or are we not? Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the safe move is just to pull out of China right now, go ahead and decouple. But, these greedy bastards are going to go back and start enslaving those poor Chinese people if they have the opportunity to do it. So why not sit back and wait and see what happens? Well, Trump dragging this thing out indefinitely certainly makes that time is money for them, right?
Yeah, no, it's good points all around there. Yeah. Well, I definitely am curious to see how that pans out as far as whether or not that would be incredible. Just incredible if Trump was able to actually show up in China and have a mano a mano with Xi and Putin at the same time for the purpose specifically of like, celebrating the 80th anniversary of the defeat of this Wall Street funded fascist monstrosity. That has so much both symbolic value, but also very practicable value behind it as well. Of course, the good scenario here would be that coming out of this Alaska summit, there's more of an agreement that the U.S. has to work with the already very vibrant growth orientation of the civilizational states of Eurasia, of the BRICS, and cooperate on the basis of these things. Like, I was just thinking about here. I'm going to just share a little screen here. Um, there's a there's a thing that I've shown on this channel a number of times, but I think it's so important that the Alaska to Canada Railway, this thing that you could see it, right? Or no, it's not
Yeah.
showing up on the screen,
Yeah.
is it?
Yep.
It
No, it's
was
there.
showing up? Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's there. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, this is something that Trump had passed an executive order giving full federal support in September of 2020. And it was a consortium that was pissed off. There were people who were rail experts. There were rail manufacturers that had all of these great ideas for developing the Arctic, developing the North, accessing a lot of these raw materials, rare earths, iron, uranium. There's so much in the Arctic, so much natural gas and other things. But Alaska's done quite well as far as mapping it out and developing more roads and infrastructure. Canada has been crap at it. And so they got together, they formed a consortium. They pitched these ideas that are very practical. They did engineering feasibility studies on connecting Alberta through into Alaska and down into the lower 48 states. Trump was sold on it, gave it full top-down support. And of course, Biden's first thing is just crush it. And you had things like McKinsey, a big firm that was involved that also helped to flush this whole project down the toilet. But it was brilliant, and the whole thing was vectored really upon the idea of restoring a way of thinking that we haven't seen active in the West in like since JFK was murdered. And if you like look down, one of the things that is going on in the Arctic is the unification in 2018 between Russia and China over the polar Silk Road. So everybody knows about the East-West Silk Road that involves, you see that shipping route in um blue cut up sort of line
The Strait
all
of
the way down through the
yeah,
Straits of
through
Malacca
Strait of
and down
Malacca and through
around
the Red Sea, yeah.
yeah, and Bab el Mandeb and Suez and into Europe. And that red line there, which is part of the sea-based sea-based route for the Polar Silk Road, which is becoming more and more active. Russia has like 40 nuclear icebreakers. China has 3 in their fleet already, the Dragon fleet. Canada has 0, which is embarrassing. But that cuts off 10 days of travel time of goods to and from Europe and Rotterdam to Beijing and Asia. So that's already just a time benefit, but also it's in tandem, and it's not here on the graph on the map, but overland developments that involve things like the Power of Siberia 1 and 2. Number 2 is going to be finished in a couple of years. The Mongolia, Russia, China rail line that's being built right now, as well as the northern branches of these advanced rail corridors that are also under construction as part of the Far East development strategy that ties China, Russia, Mongolia into a major overland development network with new cities that will be planned to spring up all the way connecting through the Bering Strait. And these are ideas that have been, again, that's an image of the Bering Strait tunnel that was composed by a rail engineer named Hal Cooper, who's now deceased, but this guy was brilliant and he did the work. And it just showcases like he did this in the 80s. You could obviously have and this little area here, this connecting point between Russia and the USA is only 50 miles in distance. It's so close. You could practically see Russia from the United States on a clear day. And there's 2 little islands as well, just separating them. And it would make such an obvious place for a transition in both like pipelines and you name it. You could have an overland highway above the sea in like a tunnel, which is what they're looking at underneath for rail. So you got all this going on. And if you go back to this is the newest article I just put out this morning. It's called The Real Reason Russia Sold Alaska to the USA in 1867. The Russians are much more in tune with this history. This is a commemorative stamp that was put forth in like 1890, commemorating Lincoln, Grant, and Alexander II. Um, and today people see this and they don't realize why Alexander II, the Tsar of Russia, who was a martyred leader, is right there in the middle, right next to being flanked by 2 American presidents. And it's only when you look at this history that you could see like why in the center of Russia, in Russia today, in downtown Moscow, this statue sits with Lincoln and Tsar Alexander II hands. Now they never actually met in person, but this is a commemorative statue that was recently done, maybe like 10 years ago, in honor of the common vision shared by these 2 collaborators who were collaborators. They're both doing the same thing at the same time. In 1860, Alexander II abolishes slavery in Russia. He's called the Great Emancipator. And that's 25 million slaves, the serfs, but it's human property that are all freed. And the year later, Lincoln does the exact same thing with his Emancipation Proclamation. And so both of them have a very common idea of a type of the next phase of human development that they both have to play a role in ushering, even if it means they will lose their lives, because they're both up against a very deeply ingrained overlord class of feudalists. In Russia, you got the deep old feudal families that want to restore the serf system, who are part of these like Freemasonic holy brotherhoods, as they call themselves. These Martinist Freemason types that were infused into Russia through Bohemian and English black magicians of the 17th century. There was already problems, obviously, going back to the earliest days of Russia and the Byzantine Empire. But still, the point is, you had these guys up against this deep state complex of black magicians and old families. Lincoln had similar problems admittedly, the families he was dealing with were not as old because America is still a newer colony compared to Russia. But still, these Eastern establishment, Freemasonic families were very powerful. Were very much not interested in getting rid of their idea of a slave empire. So both men did end up dying, and they knew that that was the danger. But they were both aware that the only way to break slavery, because once you have 5 million slaves in America that have been freed, well, that you need to now you have to create an economy that's going to be able to bring out the best of these people to put them to work. That's a huge crisis of a bunch of people who've been brutalized, who are not allowed to read. Like you would get shot if you discovered, or if a slave owner discovered that one of their slaves learned how to read. But common practice was to kill them because the danger was then that they might teach other slaves to read. And then illiterate people are not people who will very easily acquiesce to slavery. And the same thing was there for Tsar Alexander II. 25 million mostly illiterate serfs now freed. That you have to shift the culture, create like trade schools, training, provide for jobs to give these people with their new training opportunities to work in the real world in a productive way, to be entrepreneurs, right? To start up their own businesses, to get loans. Uh, all of that was very cogently done because both men had a vision. In the case of Lincoln, it was the Transcontinental Railway, that one right there, right? The Union Pacific Railroad that he started building in the middle of the Civil War, the same month that Russia comes in to save America. That's in the middle of the worst civil war that results in 500,000 Americans soldiers dying. I don't know how many other people died of dysentery and other disease and stuff, but I mean, in the middle of that crisis, Russia comes in, brings in their naval fleets that sent by Alexander II as a message to European powers to stay out of the war officially, or else it's war with Russia. So that creates a space for Lincoln and his allies to carry out the fight, and at the same time, using the greenbacks, which is basically like a treasury-based form of constitutional banking, Lincoln is able to then invest in massive industrial development with the Transcontinental Railway, the very first time in world history where a continent is united sea to sea through rail, which opens up all sorts of new resources, mining, new cities are built, and it's finished in 1869. And if you look at it, the idea was always from the get-go to build. I don't know if you could see that. Yeah, I guess people could see this. The idea was to always, like Lincoln had given a speech at Congress, the State of the Union address of 1864, as soon as he won his second election, he gave a speech calling for building rail and telegraph lines through the Bering Strait, connecting Russia to the United States and beyond. He also called for Latin America to also be united in industrial development and cooperation through rail, which takes multiple generations of forward thinking, and it really uplifts people out of the dependency on shipping and just being, nations dependent upon British Imperial East India Company controls of ports, which is the way the empire was able to run the world. So this was a very different idea. And this map, an 1890 map that Lincoln's bodyguard, William Gilpin, commissioned, and he wrote a book called The Cosmopolitan Railway. And he literally called this Gilpin's American Economic Just and Correct Map of the World. Now, this bodyguard kept Lincoln alive in the precarious early months after he was victorious in the 1860 election, and got him to Washington from Illinois safe, even though there was an assassination attempt. That same William Gilpin was so trusted that Lincoln appointed him the first governor of Colorado. And that's an important part of our story because it was while he was governor. This is the guy here on the right, William Gilpin. Um, he used Lincoln's greenback system in Colorado on a state level to emit productive credit for the purpose of building a militia that didn't exist, for paying for the weapons, for building up a small industrial base quickly in order to produce the ammunition needed to keep the Western frontier from becoming opened up and dominated by the Confederates, who did try to take the West, to create a Western front, which he was able to put down because of what he did with his state-backed greenbacks. And that was called the Battle of Glorieta Pass, which is one of the most brutal battles of the Civil War, but he came out victorious. So this guy largely played a big role in saving the Union. He was also known as, this is one of his biographies that I read. He was the father of manifest destiny, is what he was known as, or the prophet of manifest destiny. And he was one of the earliest champions from 1842 of the construction of the transcontinental railway. So before anybody else was talking about it, this guy was on board, already organizing conferences all over the US around the vision of creating an east-west connection with rail. And he said in his book that in Asia, a civilization resting on a basis of remote antiquity has had indeed a long pause, but certain civilization, although hitherto hermetically sealed up from European influence, has continued to exist. The ancient Asiatic colossus, in a certain sense, needed only to be awakened to new life, and European culture finds a basis there on which it can build future reforms. So he had this vision of getting the US and China to work together with Russia, and the Bering Strait was the key to making all of this work. And this guy even was able to get allies in Russia around Nicholas II, the Tsar who came in after Alexander III had died, probably of poisoning in 1896. And Nicholas II, slightly stupider, but still not a bad guy, is being advised by the networks of these Lincoln admiring Russians who bring in American engineers in 1902 to 1906 to do feasibility studies on the Bering Strait. And in 1906, the New York Times reports on March 27th, 1906. And I got this quote directly from the New York Times archive, where it said that the Tsar of Russia has issued an order authorizing the American syndicate represented by this Baron Loic de Loibel, who's a French guy, to begin work on the Trans-Siberian Alaskan Railroad project. The plan is to build a railroad from Siberia to Alaska by bridge and tunneling the Bering Strait. It's said that the enterprise will be capitalized at from $250 to $300 million, and that the money centers of Russia, France, and the United States will be asked to take bonds. Keep in mind, England was not invited to be a part of this for good reason. So this is like a long time coming, and obviously we know what happened, unfortunately, to the case of Tsar Nicholas. And we know what happened to Lincoln. We know what happened to McKinley, who was also moving in that direction. McKinley had huge networks with Nicholas's main advisor, Count Sergei Witte, who was the foreign minister and the guy who oversaw the building of the Trans-Siberian Railway as the transport minister from 1890 to 1898 in Russia. That's when the Trans-Siberian Railway began in Russia. Witte brought in American engineers who oversaw the building of the Trans-Siberian Railway, which was completed in 1905. And even when you go eat today to these Russian archival websites, they take pride in the fact that the trains that moved across Russia, first generation trains on the Trans-Siberian, were Philadelphia locomotives. They were made in Baldwin locomotives, made in Philadelphia, sent to Russia to be what would. And the idea was always to not have that just end in Russia's east in Vladivostok. It was always to have it connect down into China, which it did, and then to connect north through the Bering Strait into the newly sold Alaska, because why did Russia sell Alaska? The idea was that they sold it, and they knew that England was going to take control of it if they didn't move fast. In 1867, that's when the sale happened. The Russian ambassador Edward de Stokel goes up at Seward's house. Seward's sleeping. It's like 11 a.m. and he's like, "Hey, we're ready. We're ready. We'll do this tomorrow morning. But we just got the agreement from Tsar Alexander II. We'll sell it to you. $7 million. It's yours." It was Russian territory, right? And the famous story goes that Seward said, "Well, why are we going to wait for tomorrow morning when we can do it right now?" And they forced the State Department to open up. They go in, they sign the treaty, they sell Alaska, and it becomes what Seward describes. He was the Secretary of State under Lincoln. He stayed Secretary of State. He survived his own assassination attempt the night that Lincoln was killed. Right, like 20 stab wounds the night Lincoln was killed. Seward got 20 stab wounds in his body and went back to work. So tough guy. But he described it in his autobiography as the greatest success of his life. Not being a part of like saving the Union and all these things. Like he had a lot of successes, but this thing he said was the greatest success was the sale of Alaska that was done in total secrecy. Nobody knew until it was announced. Even the British were caught off guard. His enemies in Wall Street were caught off guard. Nobody knew. until all of a sudden it was announced, and it's like, okay, we're doing it. So at that point, it was a race over like who's going to control Canada. Right. This is the thing. It was like May 30th, 1867. Well, holy shit. Now at this point, you've got British Columbia that wants to get on board. I'm going to go through a lot of this stuff at the conference, by the way,
Yeah.
on the Manifest Destiny thing. So this is good practice. But British Columbia wants to get on board. You got a whole annexation movement in British Columbia, which is an isolated colony far removed from the rest of the eastern colonies of Ontario and Quebec. And Ulysses S. Grant is like, okay, let's buy you. Let's get British Columbia. And they all want that rail to go. It's about to be finished in 1869, and they want it to go straight through BC into the newly bought Alaska, and to be the connecting point. And it's only through a ton of very duplicitous, dark, and dirty murder, like a lot of murder has to happen. The governor of British Columbia has to die a mysterious death, right? Garfield has to die a very, very nasty death. Lincoln, clearly. Alexander II, yeah. But there's always this, despite all of this, and these anarchist terrorists who are being sent and controlled by the city of London, who are embedded in New York State, in Buffalo, in Ontario. There's so many anarchist communes that are like brainwashing, kind of like little synthetic cults that are brainwashing disposable zombies that are then used sometimes to go and kill a McKinley, kill a Lincoln, kill a Tsar Alexander II. They're all being murdered by these disposable anarchists who are all being incubated in these satanic little pseudo-Christian Gnostic like communes overseen by certain handlers like the Yale School, Divinity School elitist Noyes, who runs the Oneida colony. That then like shapes the guy Guiteau, William Guiteau, or no, Charles Guiteau, who's this idiot who's then brainwashed and is sent out to like go and kill Garfield, or Emma Goldman, who has her own anarchist commune, which oversees the creation of this anarchist Freemasonic little idiot, Polish anarchist, who's then sent to go and kill McKinley. Or the same thing happens with the Russian communes overseen by the same nexus, that's tied to people like Palmerston that goes and launches the bomb that kills Alexander II. And there's a number of leaders across Europe and France and Germany and in Italy who all get murdered in the same way at the same time in order to create a vacuum of leadership so that only idiots remain in positions of political decision making that are stupid enough to go and fall for traps that nobody should fall for, resulting in things like the Bolshevik Revolution, World War I, World War II. And it's just like wave after wave of pummeling that the oligarchy is launching onto the nations of the world, hoping to just like break them from this memory, the strategic orientation that they had in the 19th century and earlier towards like a more perfect union of nations working together in a harmonious fashion. They want to break that memory. So, the way I see it, like we lost a lot of time. I know you had like a small reawakening when FDR came to power, and Henry Wallace, his vice president, opened up a back channel with Stalin and with Foreign Minister Molotov, and they basically created a plan to build a highway through the Bering Strait once World War II was finished. And they gave speeches. There's a booklet called Soviet it's called the Soviet Asia Mission that Henry Wallace wrote, and in it he goes in depth. I've cited from this book. It's hundreds of dollars online. It's almost impossible to find now, but it's really inspiring. And it goes through the plans he had negotiated with Foreign Minister Molotov for the opening up of the Arctic as the new frontier for human development, with the Bering Strait as the key driver for a communion of a new type of civilization that transcends oligarchy and transcends empire. Which unfortunately, again, didn't really last long because Roosevelt died. Bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Wallace was completely fired, ousted, labeled a red commie. All of his allies who understood this strategic thinking were all labeled Stalin lover commies and destroyed. Their careers were annihilated. They were like, some of them were assassinated, like Harry Dexter White. Others just simply were crushed through slander, and all of the enemies of America took power under Truman, this 33rd degree Freemason who then oversees quickly the creation of the state of Israel, right? The unnecessary dropping of bombs onto a defeated Japan that had already said we're ready to surrender. we give up. Just please let us surrender with a little bit of dignity. Let the emperor, like, you know, be treated okay, and we're good. We're done. And their calls for surrender were ignored as they were annihilated. And maybe it wasn't nuclear bombs, maybe it was napalm. Could have been. Point is, they were annihilated as a ritual mass sacrifice under Truman and this new Anglo-American special relationship that ensured that Russia would never be cooperated with, ever again. That was the new Manichaean enemies of America, was Russia and China, the nations that fought the most to stop the Wall Street Hitler monster from winning, where those nations that sacrificed the most, fought the most, became the biggest enemies all of a sudden in the minds of kids and Americans and Europeans that had to be now, like, you know, we had to learn how to be conditioned to be afraid of nuclear holocaust every day by these godless, evil, commie bastards every day, as a brainwashing for 50 years or 60 years of Cold War. And I think that that's a lot of, like, psychological damage that was done generationally that we still haven't recovered from, which is why I think a lot of people, even now, still fall prey to a lot of the Cold War propaganda, using the same formulas and scare tactics that were used by, Mockingbird's CIA media mouthpieces in the 50s and the 60s about, evil, godless commies want to kill us and destroy our freedoms. The same language was used to get us to go and acquiesce to, evil Muslims want to destroy our freedom, and so we should acquiesce to bomb them first, which is like the more civilized thing, I suppose. Which resulted in millions of dead innocent people in the Middle East. And now it's being just changed. The same techniques, the same hypnotic inductions, evidence free. But if it's repeated enough, and you could spin anything to make all of a sudden Russia, or especially now China, appear in the minds of the consumers of that media as your biggest enemy that has to be hated and feared, even if they're the ones who are carrying out the biggest fight against this oligarchical, satanic, overlord class of murderers. They've done a great job so far, and so they want to work with us. I think Trump, his instincts are to also work with them, and I think with that type of combination of patriots in power, we can actually do a lot to purge, because it can't just be a fight inside the United States. It can't just be a fight in China or just in Russia. It has to be it's a global fight, right? So yeah, I really do hope. I really, really do hope that that what comes out of this discussion in Russia, or in Alaska, former Russia, is something which does reflect a reactivation of these historical forces. And again, what I saw Trump do in 2020 by giving an executive order to the Alaska to Canada Railway, that for me was a big one. I hope something similar can be done again. But I don't know, man. I mean, that's my view on the Arctic strategy right now. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or if you wanted to vector towards something a little bit more Zionist freakish, or anything on the other part of the world that you want to look at.
No, well, the interesting, I was reading yesterday into this, and it appeared that Nicholas was trying to do this bridge that you like some sort of a bridge or a tunnel across the Bering Strait, but it was actually the 1905 revolution that prevented that. Because of the fallout from the 1905 revolution. For those who aren't familiar with the 1905 revolution, it's what Vladimir Lenin called the dress rehearsal for the 1917 revolution. It was a revolution led by a guy named Chernov, but also Lenin and Trotsky. Basically a failed revolution, but it did result in, like, the creation of the Duma, the Russian legislature, and basically set the stage for the 1917 revolution, because it was led by all the same people: the socialists, the communists, the subversive actors from the outer rim of the Russian Empire, Finland, Central Asia, and what we would describe as Ukraine. It was the Pale of Settlement at the time, but it was Minsk, like Belarus, modern day Belarus, leaders from Ukraine. Yeah, and I mean, it's just amazing to me that they called the Romanovs these horrible dictators. Why didn't Nicholas II round these people up and execute them all after this revolution? That's what.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
exactly.
Like if he was such a tyrant, why didn't he round all these people up and execute them? They were just walking around free after a failed revolution against his government.
Although, you know what, one thing that's interesting, and I know we have to wrap it up. I totally forgot that there's a deadline for today's show. But one thing that's interesting here is that those same, I was mentioning that you have these feudal overlord classes in Russia, of these old Russian, like black nobility families. A lot of them were bringing in the Theosophist cult through the Freemasonic or the Marxist Freemasonic networks, including some of the people who were doing some of the most damage were leading advisors to Nicholas II and his wife, who were introducing into Russia first such things like the Protocols of Zion, the Protocols of the Lost Elders of Zion uh, pamphlets, proving to the Tsar that there was this Jewish conspiracy and that all of his problems, these anarchist communes, all of these problems of the Bolsheviks were all done by the Jews. And so he became much more paranoid and much more inclined to clamp down on the Jews. And so what he started doing is he reactivated the Jewish pogroms inside of Russia, which was brutal. And there were like sanctioned Christian like gangs that would go out and were reading these pamphlets that were mass circulating in Russia, becoming convinced and organized to go and slaughter Jews. And there was like lynch mobs, kind of like you saw with the Confederate South, attacking black people under the KKK of Albert Pike, whose statue has just been revived, by the way, which is weird, last week. I don't know if you heard this. KKK founder Albert Pike's statue was set back into place in the center of Washington, D.C., which is messed up. That's a side note. But like the KKK was carrying out like ritual mass killings, lynch mobs of newly freed blacks, right? That went on for a while. Same thing was happening in Russia, except it was against the Jews. They didn't have black people so much. So that was part of the grander plan by these same because the Theosophists, when you actually read Blavatsky, you read the writings of a lot of these key figures who are writing the forged documents to paint the Jews as the ultimate villains of the world. They all hate Jews. They're all anti-Semitic. They actually hate the Jews, but they want the Jews for a ritual sacrifice. So they wanted to get rid of the Jewish problem by figuring out a way to make things so hostile in Russia, so hostile in Europe, which was done pretty well through these things, this propaganda, that the Jews would want to leave, that they wouldn't want to stay there because they were so afraid for their security and they were so like, treated like shit. And that was one of the useful things that was done to convince as many of them to go and live in the desert, to become part of this new construction of this synthetic type of blood and soil cult, overseen by these people working at the highest levels of the British Freemasonic apparatus. So that's just a side note that is tied to what we're living in right now. But
there was a little bit of vindication there, because I mean the Bolshevik Revolution was definitely like a Jewish revolution, but they were just all atheists. But I mean, it's like they did kind of become like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they did rise up and butcher.
Like that's the way it works.
Everybody in Moscow, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the way it works, right? So they created this synthetic movement of anarchist atheists that were like organized and incubated by high priests who just see these people as useful, disposable pawns. But they create the problem, and then the problem has like, you're like, oh, look, it's justified. But there's this higher game going on that people don't pay enough attention to, and then they fall into the traps being laid for them left and right. The Jews fall into their own traps by acquiescing to adapting to this like new ideology of Zionism, and then, or just anarchistic, whatever the hell that is. And then the people who freak out about them and act in an overbearing way in a reaction on the opposite direction also get, they get their faces blown up, because it's a bomb that you're hitting that's going to backfire. So, and then the oligarchy, which thinks long term, they're laughing at us. They're laughing the whole way through. So all that to say, I forgot that there was some ads that I have to read before we close it out. So maybe we can do is I'll read the ad, or I'll play the ad, because they're already produced ads. There's 3 of them. Okay. And while that's happening, you could just scan through, see if there's any worthwhile comments to read, and we'll just get that done. So first one here that I forgot is Rise. Here it is.
Howdy, Badlanders. Looking for something new to grab from your friends at Badlands Media and Rise Attire? Summertime is here. We got you covered. All new tank tops for men and women, featuring new iterations of the Devolution design in black, red, white, and even blue and green digital camo. Sick. We got them for Psy War and Clown World too. How about these bad boys? Psywar, Clown World, and Devolution beach towels to help you spark up a conversation with your new best friend or future spouse at the pool. And by popular demand, we've got all new athletic women's leggings that'll have you red pilling all the ladies in your Pilates class, whether they like it or not. Too bad. This is Badlands, baby, and we're strapped. Get some and support the new media parallel economy as much as fucking possible at badlandsmedia.tv/rise.
Okay, that's a hilarious script. Okay, and then the other. Are you there, Gordon? Yeah, you're there. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah. We're having a bad storm right now, so my internet might go out.
We are too, actually. It's pretty bad. All right, the next one is a GERT advertisement. So let me just run that one.
Can't make it to Deadwood? No problem. Join us virtually for the 9th stop on the Badlands Great American Restoration Tour. Streaming live August 15th through 17th from legendary Deadwood, South Dakota. Experience GART from anywhere with our exclusive virtual live stream ticket. Your pass unlocks front row access to lively discussions and the premiere of Codex 9/11. All from the comfort of your own home. Make new friends and have your questions answered live from the group chat. Grab a ticket to join us in Deadwood. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/Deadwood and get your pass today.
All right, that was cool. And now for the final and last 35-second, most interesting, odd, and ambiguous ad that I've ever seen. It's something called soft disclosure. So let me just run that. Is Badlands going into like soaps and stuff? Is that what's happening?
We're not. People will hear more about this at GART, I think. So
Okay.
there's.
All right. I'll just keep the ambiguity going.
It's supposed to be ambiguous. Yeah. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Fun.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Fun. So yeah, I don't know if there's any final. We have 5 minutes, so I don't know if there's any wrap up thoughts or anything from yourself or from the audience.
Yeah, there's at least one rant, and I'm pulling up the boost right now. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
All right. Looks like no boosts, but we do have a rant, and the rant's from Ashley D, and it says, "It's the boomers that are holding us back with their issues on Russia and Israel." Yeah, I mean, I don't engage like in the identity politics of like blanket characterization. Though I do understand what you're saying. There is a obviously like with conditioning, and conditioning is often a generational thing. So certain generations are going to be more susceptible or prone to believe certain things than others, just depending on what psyops they lived through and narratives they lived through their life. But yes, you're right that people who were born in the mid 20th century and grew up with the advent of television are certainly going to view Russia with more hostility and view Israel more favorably than people of my generation who were born in the 80s and have grown up over the past 30 or 40 years. Though I would say our audience at Badlands tends to skew more towards boomer generation than millennial, which is my generation. So it's not like it's all boomers, but I 100% understand what you mean, and you're not wrong. But they do seem to be waking up, hopefully. And that's obviously, I think that you're definitely going to have a very different set of a different zeitgeist once the boomer generation, I think, has passed, like in the future, like 20 years from now, I think American politics is going to look very different than it looks right now. Like there's the support for Zionism is going to be non-existent. I think that might happen far sooner than that, just given the trajectory of the narrative right now. But if nothing were to change and we just maintained the status quo, I think naturally the support for Zionism is going to fade away, just because the younger generations just aren't into it.
Absolutely. They're definitely not doing themselves any favors right now for their long-term secure existence. And I tend to think, and also boomerism, the way I see it, is not really a generational or time thing. It's more of a state of mind. When I think of that, you could be a 20-year-old boomer. I've met them. And you could be like somebody in their 60s or 70s who's not a boomer. I that's how I see boomer now, as more of a state of mind.
That's well said.
That's
well said. Yeah, because I agree. I mean, there are people I know who are my age who are total boomers, like in the derogatory sense, like they're total boomers. But and then obviously, like we'll be at GART for the next several days, and I will meet plenty of people who are my parents' age who are base as hell. So it's just more of an individual thing. But appreciate the support, Ashley. Thank you all for being here. Hit the thumbs up. We will be back next week, and I will see you, Matt, tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Oh, tomorrow! I'm going to be in the plane. I'm landing tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah. Bye. See ya.
Yeah, man.
Ciao.
See ya.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.